Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. We are back with another positional breakdown and today we're focusing specifically on strikers, so the number 9s. Now we'll be answering lots of different questions. If you're a player, what types of sessions, exercises, drills should you be working on a weekly basis? What are the different type of profiles as a number 9 and the different identities and how do they relate to the different sessions? And how do you become more efficient? So the key thing from a coaching or a playing point of view, if you're a striker, you have to be feeling the back of the net consistently during the week going into the games on a weekend. So from a coaching point of view, how can we expect players to be really efficient in front of goal under pressure if we're not rehearsing the techniques required under that pressure dozens of times during the week? And that doesn't just revolve around the technical side, the execution, the reps. It's around the confidence as well. Where does confidence come from? Confidence comes from putting yourself in the same situation time and time again. And from a coaching point of view, and I've been here so many times myself personally, it's so easy to get caught up during the week on the planning of collective. So possession, tight areas, tactical side, shape, whatever it may be. And then you get to the game, the strikers are being judged on how efficient they are in front of goal. And actually you can count on one hand the number of reps that they've had during that week on what they're being judged on.
Now to begin, players, you have to know yourself and what type of striker you are, and equally for coaches, what profiles are you working with? And these are determined generally by players' physical, technical or tactical attributes. And ideally they'd excel in all of these areas, but generally you find they mould towards one identity. So let's look through some examples. So the finisher is the striker who may contribute little in other areas, but absolutely excels in front of goal, so a pure poacher. Then the target, so that's the more physical, powerful, dominant 9 who holds the ball up, often plays on their own and acts as that platform for attacks, really allowing the team to gain territory up the pitch. Then you've got more or less the opposite to that, so the runner who exploits the spaces in behind through clever movement, speed, offering verticality and directness to the team and really stretching the game. Then it's the creator type or the second striker, so arriving in front of the back line and playing final passes, the ability to really outplay opponents individually, particularly with pressure behind. Then the evolution of the creator is essentially the false 9, so occupying centre backs in the build-up phase, but then coming to overload the middle through those arrival movements and constantly dropping deep. Now regardless of the profile, the obvious metric that all strikers are judged on is efficiency in finishing. And in terms of practicing finishing, we first need to know the demands of the game so we can replicate those realistic scenarios. Now the most prominent factors on finishing can be split into 4 variables: location, technique, number of touches and type of finish. So to start, where are most goals scored? Well, Premier League stats are almost identical every single year, with 12% of goals coming from outside the box and 88% coming from inside. If we put strikers under the microscope, just one of Haaland's 36 goals came from outside the box last season. And it's backed up as well by his average shot distance being 12.6 yards. Then, if we jump internationally and look at one of the best finishers in the world, 96% of Harry Kane's England goals have come from inside the box. Now, despite these stats, we still see so many finishing sessions from outside the area. Now, inside this box though, what are the most common techniques? Well, 80% of goals are with the feet, 15% are with the head and 5% being other. So in training we have to prepare players with a higher focus of finishing with the feet, but then with some heading sprinkled in as well. Now, what are the average number of touches before a finish? Because we see a lot of sessions on finishing off the dribble, but the stats show something different. 62% of goals are off one touch, 19% are off 2 touches and 18% are 3 touches or more. And in terms of these minimal touch finishes then, what are the specific types? Well, analysis on finish types shows there isn't actually one standout, and instead it's a complete range of 360-degree angles, varied crossing positions, loose balls, spontaneous reactions. And before we piece all these stats together, the key to coaching is knowing what the game looks like at the elite level, but then being able to unravel and simplify how that looks for each player or the group. So we have all these stats, but how does it relate to a session? We know finishes should predominantly be inside the 18, but encompassing various different positions within the box. A high percentage of the execution should be with the feet, but it has to include unorthodox serving of ground, bouncing and aerial crosses. Finishes should predominantly be reactive, so with minimal thinking time on 1 and 2 touches, and we also need to include some loose balls and spontaneous strikes. And the older the player is, we have to layer in some tactical elements before and or after the finish. So for the setup, it was actually influenced by Ronaldo's session at Man United, and it's really simple. So we split the box into 4 areas by starting on the posts and then walk a line of cones to the corners of the box. Then, again from the posts, walk a line to the top of the 18. So this creates 4 triangles, and we'll call these right 1, right 2, left 1 and left 2. And 2 crossers position themselves either side of the box. So there's our little Messi and Saka. And then the striker's going to start just outside the 18 with a coach or a parent or some form of feeder 5 yards behind them. Now, the striker will work through a continuous series of 5 different finishes with no break, and all of them are performed in the R1 quadrant to begin with. So rep 1 starts with a pullback. So on the ground from the side closest to the striker. Rep 2 then comes from the opposite side, and this time it's a whipped bouncing cross. For rep 3, the striker comes up and back to the mannequin, replicating a back line squeezing out. And then the feeder slips a slide pass in behind for an off-the-shoulder type finish. The striker then turns and receives a loose ball in behind where they swivel on the spot and strike in 1 touch. And then for the final rep, the far wide player delivers on the full, so for a header or a volley. So it's 5 different finishes, each is a different scenario, and then the striker rests for 60 seconds, or they switch places with another player if it's more of a positional specific practice. So players work through each of the 4 areas. So the next set, for example, would be in right 2. So that's the basic setup, but specificity is absolutely key, especially for coaches who are working closer to that elite level. So let's jump into some examples and progressions then. The higher the level of the player though, the higher up that decision-making ladder they should spend most of the time working, because pressure directly influences the finish choice. We can have pressure in many different stages, but a goalkeeper or a defender who's blocking or recovering are 2 simple ways. So how does this directly influence finish type though? Well, top level strikers have awareness and composure of where they are in the box, and they draw down their execution from, call it the hard drive that they've built in training, because they've scored that goal hundreds of times before. So this exercise is just one example of strikers building what I call pitch geography. So for example, ball is pulled back into zone R1, then boom, bottom corner across the goalkeeper. Now the goal never moves, but the goalkeeper position changes the angle and the finish type. So as examples, the goalkeeper here would protect the near post, so the finish would be across the goalkeeper. If a right-footed striker found themselves in L1 zone, then same principle, so head up, freeze the goalkeeper, but this time the angle opens up perfectly for that bend into the far corner, so the classic Thierry Henry finish. So through this exercise, build up your hard drive of finishes. Next up, we have the movement. Now 7-to-1s are a principle where elite players receive the ball, on average, 1 in every 7 movements they make. And this is especially applicable for strikers. And to simplify striker movements, they can either have the intention of getting in behind or receiving to feet. Now, in behind top line movements are vertical, direct runs to receiving behind the back lines, and the timing is the most important aspect. So basic principles: no pressure on the ball, make eye contact with the teammate, the head is up, and stay onside by always being aware of the line. So if the pass gets delayed, keep your hips and shoulders forward facing by going across the line. Now, the striker can make the same intention of run but by going across and in front of the centre back. So again, principles: lazy on the build up, out of the eye line of the centre back, and then late and explosive in behind. Then the final vertical movement is off the double, so straight line, come short, hold the centre back out, and then spin in behind when the momentum comes out to pressure. Then the final movements to feet will be covered in a separate video, as these relate to build up as opposed to actually creating finishing opportunities. Now, the profiles we went through right at the start, these should also be an important consideration when players are closer to those tactical performance levels. So the playing style of the team and or the identity of the player, these are the extra 1%ers when planning finishing activities. So how would we manipulate the session around this? Well, a team who constantly work the ball closer to the opponent's box with less space for strikers to run into, they'd focus more on pullbacks and stand-ups and move that crosser a little deeper. Whereas a team who play with width, delivering earlier, they'd work on those wider crosses. A target type player would add in extra aerial deliveries to work on different angles heading, where your runner type profile would add off the shoulder type finishes from a variety of different through balls. And going back to the earlier point around unravelling the elite level requirements and then tailoring those for each individual, accountability is vital on so many levels. As an example, a way of promoting it in this exercise would be to film the session or track the numbers after each set, and then build the data on the areas players are strong in, which finishes they excel at, which areas they need to focus more on. And the striker reflection map is just one example of how to promote self-development through watching their own video. So it's the player's plan and they're the ones driving it. So how do we incorporate the tactical elements either before and or after the finish? Well, every technique has a tactical component attached to it. So for example, we've got a front three here working on various combination finishes specific to their identities, but then the second action is a light switch transition to counter press. So the individual moment of recognising the turnover and then applying the relevant detail around pressing techniques and how these relate to the front three collectively, tactically. So principally, the individual finishing techniques go live into a unit-based defending situation where the tactical elements are then worked on, and then regain moments lead to their own counter-attacks. So we've got all three components trained simultaneously as opposed to isolated and working them as three separate practices. Why do we do this? Well, the game is very, very fluid, and I'm of the belief that all four moments, so in possession, out of possession, transition to attack, and transition to defend, should be trained collectively in the majority of collective activities, because how one is executed directly impacts another. In terms of individual to collective and individual to the team training tactical structure, I often get asked a very similar question by coaches around how can we incorporate individual development, so positional identity work, in this instance strikers finishing, in a collective team training practice if we don't have the resources to be able to do it. So around team training space, training time, and assistants to be able to pull them out, etc. Now, individual development doesn't just come in the form of isolated practice, so i.e. pulling a player out or a unit out and working with them alone. It can come within a collective structure. Let me give a real simple example. So if the coach is working on build up and playing out as a collective topic for the group, rather than beginning the ball with the goalkeeper and we play from there and they work the patterns and the movements and the combinations, squeeze the back line to the edge of the box, the striker plays on the shoulder of one of the centre backs, the ball begins in an attacking midfielder position or with a coach, they play a pass in behind, the 9 goes on to finish, and then the ball starts with the goalkeeper on the collective original topic. Now, as the build-up's going on, the coach can feed back to the striker. Type of movement, so all the elements we spoke about before, type of movement, type of finish, technique, goalkeeper position, different types of serves, you can play bouncing balls from wide crosses, slip passes.
So the individual striker or strikers get exactly what they need in terms of feedback and detail. They get the reps that they need, so you get 15, 20, 25 reps on different types of finish. And the group collectively get exactly what they need as well in terms of playing out, build-up structure, patterns, movements.
So that concludes the video on strikers. For more webinars, video content and books, please visit www.trainingspecific.com.